This is a UK Power Networks podcast. If you want to learn more, head to our website and look for the Future Energy tab.
Hi everyone, thanks for listening to us today. COP26 is happening right now, and of course there is a lot in the news around it. We wanted to focus this episode on not just the big ambitions about the climate crisis, but also on the day-to-day work that's being done on the ground to make it happen for real. Joining me today are Adriana Laguna and Shira Lappin. You'll also get to hear from our CEO, Basil Scarsella. Basil was speaking at a recent appearance at the ENA's Energy Networks Innovation Conference. Lastly, you'll hear from our innovation engineer, Peter Lang, as well. I caught up with Peter recently at one of his projects where we've been installing a new machine that allows more people to connect electric car chargers on a specific street in South London. So without further ado, Adriana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Adriana Laguna and I am Head of Stakeholder Engagement and Strategy at UK Power Networks. I have been here for 10 years and been working on the transition to net zero for now over 10 years. And part of my role in the innovation space has always been engaging with stakeholders because most of our innovation projects have always involved many parties across the industry and other industries. So now I am in charge of really going out to understand everyone's perspective on these challenges and see how we can support and collaborate to enable net zero.
Thanks, Adriana. Now, Shira?
Yeah, sure. So, hi, I'm Shira. I'm an innovation project lead at UK Power Networks. I focus on EV charging issues and in particular looking at public charging on street and en route. So I've been looking at public charging through this Charge Collective project. I've also been leading a project called Enable, where we're looking at how we can help make EVs a reality for disabled drivers who use public charging and seeing what the barriers there and the opportunities to overcome those barriers are. And I've also been working to look at modular solutions for motorway service areas to try and deploy EV charging there at scale.
Thanks, Shira. So now I'm going to play a couple of excerpts from Basil Scarsella, UK Power Networks CEO. You'll hear Basil speaking and taking part in a panel discussion on what COP26 means for the electricity and gas networks in the UK. Specifically, Basil also mentions what we are doing as a company to facilitate net zero.
And I think COP26 is a continuation of what's happened for the last probably 3 or 4 years, especially, and importantly, in order for the community, for all of us to achieve net zero, we depend on the support of the public. And the government, as I say, over the last couple of years have done an excellent job, I think, in improving the support. And it started off, firstly, we were the first country to legally commit to achieving the 2050 net zero. Then we had the Prime Minister with this 10-point plan. That was followed by the Energy White Paper and the banning of new combustion engine vehicles by 2030. We also then had the election of Biden as US president, which I think has brought back the US in the sort of fold in terms of climate change. And finally, now, 2 weeks away, we have COP26, which is the culmination of a number of initiatives that have taken place, so let's just say over the last 2 or 3 years, to put the transition to net zero in the forefront of the public and ensure that the public support that. Now, COP26, Glasgow, for the first 2 weeks in November, will be the focus of the world. And following the conclusion, I'd expect that there'll be agreement by a very large majority of the countries in the world. I'd expect an acceleration to the pace, to the transition to net zero. And I think that's going to be an exciting time, I think, to be involved in the electricity industry, because the electricity, in simple terms, decarbonisation and transition to net zero, the way I would describe it is take carbon out of transport, heat, firstly electricity, which we're well underway, then transport, heat, and put electricity in everything else. And so to be part of the electricity industry, I think over the next 20, 30 years is going to be an exciting time. So that's what I see. I think COP26 will continue to reinforce and accelerate the pace of transitioning to net zero. From a UK Power Networks perspective, how do we support net zero? We look at in four ways broadly. Firstly, how do we, as UK Power Networks, achieve net zero, by when, and what we're going to do, how we're going to go about it? Firstly, we as an organisation aim to achieve net zero by 2028. We've obviously well underway towards that target. And the important thing, we've had our targets verified by the Science-Based Target Initiatives, which supports the fact that our targets are real, achievable, and importantly, we're going to be held accountable as we progress towards the 2028 target. So as an organisation, we are well underway towards achieving net zero, as I say, by 2028. Secondly, and probably more important, as an electricity distribution network in London, the east and the southeast of England, we need to ensure that the electricity network is fit for purpose to enable the connection of low carbon technologies that will enable the economy in our service territory to actually transition to net zero. To that end, we believe that, for example, by 2028, there'll be some 2 to 3 million EVs that will be connected, electric vehicles that will be connected to our network. We believe there'll be some 400,000 heat pumps. And if the rumours that we're reading in the paper are correct, then the government comes out with a heat policy that looks at banning gas boilers from 2035, then clearly the introduction of heat pumps will also accelerate dramatically. We also look at, we expect to have some 2 million low carbon technologies such as battery storage, solar and wind farms, and both domestic and commercial type farms. And importantly, that we could see the uptake of domestic nuclear micro generators. So from our perspective, we're working very hard to make sure that together with our stakeholders, we understand what is happening and what how demand for the introduction of low carbon technology is going to grow over the next few years, so that we can actually proactively prepare the electricity network to make sure that it's ready to take up those low carbon technology. So, thirdly, we also have 6,000 employees in our workforce, and the plan is for us to work with the 6,000 employees and encourage them to actually transition to net zero over between now and 2030. And finally, and importantly, and Chris has touched on this, various local authorities have declared climate emergencies, and we are working with them to understand their plans, both local authorities and major organisations such as TfL, Ubers, the black taxis here in London, to understand what their plans are in terms of transitioning to net zero. And we advise them to ensure that they locate various charging facilities in the best location possible, both to attract users, but just as importantly, to for them to connect to our network at the lowest possible cost. The way we look at that, if we can deliver those four things, and I repeat, firstly, as an organisation, achieve net zero. Secondly, enable the economy in our part of the world, in our service territory, to achieve net zero, helping our employees and helping the various local authority, then I think we'll be in good shape to, as I say, to enable and support the transition to net zero.
So Adriana, something I wanted to pick up with you there is about Basil talking about how central the electricity network is in all this. As he alluded to, it is kind of taking carbon out of electricity and putting electricity into everything else, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think electricity is definitely at the center of the transition, and of course, as Basil was saying, it starts with the electricity itself has to be clean, but then all the carbon intensive industries need to find an alternative, and electricity, and hopefully clean electricity, will be one of the key sources. I think in that sense as well, what I find really interesting and exciting about working on the distribution network is that electricity needs to travel. So it's not just about where it's generated from or who's consuming it, but really the DNO has a job to deliver that electricity. And so we're really at the center of the transition, because we need to enable the clean electricity to flow into our network, but also enable that to reach consumers.
Yeah, and I suppose that means that you've got all these different sectors. So you've got transport, you've got gas, heat, heavy industries, agriculture, manufacturing, whatever. Previously, they may never have had to work together that closely, but now, because of COP26 and because of the pressure about the climate crisis, they are starting to have to work together, and I think that's perhaps one of the great things about big major events like COP26, because it brings these industries together and it starts to build bridges.
Yeah, I think with climate change, there are many companies in every kind of sector that have already started to take really important strides and have progressed. And so there are so many lessons that we can learn on how to achieve net zero. So we are, as Basil said, we're setting our own targets on decarbonizing ourselves, because we see our role as, okay, well, if we're going to facilitate net zero, we have to lead by example. And so at least let's start with ourselves and look at our carbon footprint and how can we reduce it. But and that kind of includes, for example, our supply chain. So we aren't just talking about us and our fleet. It's wider than that. And when you start kind of opening your eyes and just diversifying your input of information, you realize that there are lessons to learn from every sector. Obviously, as utilities, there's lots to learn from other countries, and that's what COP is really great about. For that, it brings everyone from every country around every interest. Everyone will be here, and everyone will be discussing how we, as a society, as humanity, just move forward. So there's definitely lessons to learn from other utilities, from other sectors, from other countries, and really collectively kind of move forward. I do think that the UK is quite advanced, and I do think that it's really important that we share everything that we have learned, and I think I've kind of realized that as in like the last years, just because we started this journey not knowing anything, and then suddenly we were kind of the experts, or at least we have been working, and so many of the things that we kind of give for granted, we realize that actually there's a lot of people that could benefit from learning everything that we have already experimented with or trialed, or seen that it doesn't work, and so I do think these conferences and even using social media and the virtual world to share more information is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shira, I suppose that's what it's about, really, gathering momentum and helping people get more involved.
Yeah, I think COP26 it's an exciting opportunity. It's not going to roll around in this country very often. So I think it's a time to use the momentum that's gathered behind it and the amount of publicity, and that it's in the news every day. So it's an exciting time where, sometimes this stuff can feel a bit maybe technical or a bit boring for the day-to-day, but actually it's vital. So I think using COP26 to get those messages out and to get people to think about how they want to change their own personal behaviour, as well as how they want behaviour to change at the government and corporate level, and seeing how we can try and influence that and make sure that we achieve those net zero goals. Because, as they're saying all the time at COP26, we don't have much time left, so it's getting urgent. And so I think anything that helps address that urgency and use it to get to a solution faster is a good thing.
Yeah, and Adriana, obviously you have had a lot of experience with that specifically, as part of your work. You've worked with a lot of people from all sorts of sectors as momentum over time has been built on this challenge of decarbonisation. What's your experience been like?
I think what has come out is that it's kind of a two-way effort. You do need the national policies, and you do need the COPs to happen to set that overall direction, but it actually doesn't really matter if they don't have the actual local commitments, because ultimately it's not until you dive into the details that you realize how complex these issues are. Because it sounds great, it sounds easy, let's just reduce carbon and that's it. But then when you actually go into what does that mean? Let's not just talk about England. Let's not talk about UKPN. Let's look at a village. What does it take to convert just a block of social housing to electric heat? And suddenly you realize that there are very intricacies and problems, like very specific problems to doing that, which is why it's so essential to do these trials. Now, kind of in that journey, we realize the importance that the local governments have, because it's sort of the local governments now have the mandates to implement their own targets, but to actually put a specific target that you can achieve, you need a lot of information. And what we have realized is that we started doing our forecasts, because we have to plan in periods of 8 or 5 years now to see what infrastructure investment will we need. And the way we do that is we say, well, let's project, how many EVs are we going to have in our network? And that's kind of fast, and you could take an assumption. And we usually started using the national grid forecasts, which were even broader. And then we would say, okay, well, let's extrapolate that to our section. But when we realized actually what we need to do is more like bottom up. Like how do you make that match, and how can we be more specific about what is the impact and where EVs are going to connect in our network, so that I can actually plan to see if I actually need a substation in this specific location. We realized that local authorities or local governments might not have the capacity to do that modeling. And so because we were already doing it, we said, well, how can we make this data available to them, and how can we make it useful to them? And so in that sense, we started working with them to say, okay, well, have you looked at these forecasts? We think this data could actually be useful to you. And some of them, in declaring their climate emergency, now they need to build plans. And so if plans equal electrification plans, or how are they going to, how many charge points are they going to install across their boroughs, or how many heat pumps do they, or what is their aim, or how can they set specific targets for their residents? It's quite specific. And what we realize is that we can't tell them, because we don't know the answer, but we can definitely collaborate with them to see what solutions there are, what technical kind of pathways there can be. And so we started, we've put some very interesting projects around around charging infrastructure and just kind of basic local energy planning, which have really opened our eyes into the different problems that there can be, and every area is different as well. And so we've really had to focus on kind of what frameworks can we put in place that are generic enough that can be useful, but also what information do they need, and what how can we bridge that gap of knowledge so that we all, move in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you there. You've got that larger climate crisis global discussion, but then it's only when you start unpacking that, making it real in specific areas, the complexity really unfolds very quickly. Shira, your Charge Collective project really exists in that exact area, right? Because it's looking at how we can support public infrastructure for charging with a few specific councils in our areas. Do you want to tell us a bit about the project?
So Charge Collective is an innovation project that we've been running for just over a year now. We're running it in collaboration with local authorities, so with the London Borough of Redbridge, Cambridge City Council and Cambridgeshire Council, County Council, and Norwich City Council and Norfolk County Council. And the idea of the project is really to address what we see as the market failure in on-street charging for public on-street charging for people who can't charge at home because they don't have a driveway or off-street parking. So what we found was that there's under-provision in that segment, and then we went out and we spoke to our customers who park on-street and found that there's that real chicken and egg problem where they're not adopting EVs because there are no charge points, and charge point operators and investors aren't investing in EVs in certain areas because the EVs aren't there yet. So the business case isn't stacking up. So we're working with local authorities to see how we can address that by, first of all, planning local networks of charge points, which means that everyone in the area feels like they have the confidence to switch because there's a good coverage of charge points rather than just one charge point for one person who requested it. And also seeing how we can help socialise some of the reinforcement costs that can cause the cost of charge points being prohibitively high and making it uninvestable in certain areas. And
by socialise the cost, you mean we are going to lower our connection costs and support any potential upgrades that might be required, so that it will be cheaper for charge point installers to connect their electric charge points, and therefore it'll be more attractive for them to do so. Exactly. So when a new connection comes onto our network, whether that's a charge point or anything else, there are essentially two types of costs. So there's the cost for the new grid connection and the work around that. And then if there is any reinforcement that's needed because of the extra capacity on the network and any, if it's a highly loaded part of the network, which often these urban areas are, then there's a reinforcement cost. So that may be overlaying cables, it may be upgrading substations, and the connecting customers need to pay a portion of that reinforcement cost at the moment. So we're looking at whether we can reduce that cost in order to make it easier for charge point operators to invest, and also for us to look at reinforcing our network in a more holistic way. And so we're digging once, so we're upgrading the local network sort of as a whole rather than piecemeal as requests come in, which means that there's less disruption for residents and it should be lower cost overall as well for customers. And this is something that the local authorities you're working with are really passionate about, right? Because many of them have declared climate emergencies, and not only that, but as Adriana spoke about, they are very much at the front and centre of change in their areas, so, specifically when it comes to cars and roads. Absolutely. So lots of local authorities, and especially the ones we're working with, have declared a climate emergency and have got net zero targets of 2050 or even 2030, some local authorities. And they also, decarbonisation of transport is big on their agenda. Transport, parking, congestion is all something that falls into a local authority remit. And also the social benefits of the electrification of transport, which is part of why we think there's the market failure, because there are benefits that can't be priced in, essentially. So there's huge air quality improvements from transitioning to EVs over ICE vehicles, petrol and diesel vehicles. And
that can't be, that's not priced in, so that's why you get the sort of undersupply of those charge points. But there's huge benefits for local residents, for health outcomes. There's lots in the news recently around children having very poor health outcomes as a result of poor air quality and the increase in things like asthma in children. And so by reducing the number of ICE vehicles in local areas, it's a kind of a concrete way for local authorities to try and address those issues.
What's it been like to work with them?
Yeah, it's been great. It's been really interesting. I think that they've all got quite different approaches, but similar in, local authorities, they're there to serve their residents. And so they all are very keen and engaged and want to get this done. But this is a new area for them. They don't often necessarily have to interact with the grid on such a local level. And so it's been really interesting to sort of combine our expertise, for example. So we can sort of say, well, here's where the grid is congested. So that might be an area where the market failure is stronger. And then they can say, well, we know that part of town, first of all, has lots of people who park on the street and need public charging. And maybe, there's lots of cars there for certain reasons that we maybe wouldn't necessarily know as an electricity network, but they know as a local authority. So, there might be lots of cab drivers who live near there, or lots of people who drive vans for work and park them at home. So there's higher need for charging there. So combining that local expertise with the grid expertise has been really, really great and help us to design networks that we think will really serve the needs of customers in those areas.
Yeah, and at the end of the process, I guess the ultimate outcome is that these areas will have more public charge points installed so that residents can use them, right? And that will make it easier for people who've got electric cars, and hopefully more attractive for people who are interested in getting electric cars as well. Then that creates a template which feeds into our business planning for the future, because in the next RIIO-ED2 price control period, we've committed to supporting the rollout of 2,400 on-street chargers in exactly these types of areas. So it's not just in Charge Collective, but also beyond as well. When will we see more charge points installed in our areas?
So in the Charge Collective trial area, so Cambridge, Redbridge and Norwich, we would hope that that should start to happen over the next year, so over 2022. And then for the ED2 plans, that would happen over the price control period. So that starts from April 2023 up to March 2028.
That's got to be a great end goal for you, the real chargers installed in real streets. That'll be the culmination of a lot of hard work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, having an end goal and actually being able to see something come to fruition is going to be great.
Absolutely great. Well, thank you both so much for your time today. It's been a really, really interesting conversation. Now we've got to get away and do lots of interesting things. So thank you both so much for your time. Thanks, Adriana.
All right. Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shira.
Thanks very much. Bye.
And lastly, I wanted to leave you with a clip from a recent conversation I had with innovation engineer Peter Lang about one of his projects, which is really getting down into the detail of how we can actually easily connect more electric car chargers and heat pumps, this time in residential areas, for homeowners. Peter was kind enough to meet me on a pretty cold, windy morning on a street in South London. We walked kind of up and down the street, and he explained how the project is testing a new device called a phase switch system. In short, the system works by balancing the electrical load across different houses on a street so that every home is taking a fair share of the electrical capacity. So ultimately more electric car chargers or heat pumps can connect in the future. Peter took me through what it's been like looking for test locations for the project and kind of how it all works.
Started looking for candidate sites. We needed to have these clusters of electric vehicles because that is what the whole project is trying to resolve. So trying to find clusters of vehicles, we had to approach the OLEV, the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, and ask them for addresses where people have got electric vehicles, and here's one here at number 25. And what happened was they were only prepared to provide us with the addresses with just the postcode, and with the postcode you could have this side of the street with one postcode and that side of the street with a different postcode, and there's another charge point. So what we had to do was then look at the postcodes that we've been given and the substations that we have in our area, and saying, right, is it likely that these customers are all fed off the same LV feeder? And as more and more customers do have electric vehicles, we will then start seeing more and more load increasing on various feeders. But it could be the situation where the load may increase on one phase and less on the others. So we'll be looking at how can we move some of those customers who are now increasing the load on the one phase, moving it across to the other, which is where we ended up working with low carbon electric, the company that developed the phase switch system, as a solution to resolving this issue, because it's not just electric vehicle charge points which are likely to increase load on our low voltage cables, but also, as we've heard recently on the news, heat pumps. And heat pumps are going to also be on for long periods of time. The way we have designed our networks in the past is that we would have a peak of demand, shall we say, about tea time, and then the cables would then be given a chance to cool down, ready for the demand of the following day. But now with these low carbon technologies, the electric vehicle chargers, the heat pumps, they are all going to change the way the demand profile appears, and we need to do something different. Now, by doing something different doesn't really mean putting in a larger transformer or digging up the whole pavement and laying a new cable and providing new services to all the customers. What we want to try and do is utilise our existing assets, the existing cables in the ground, but trying to move the customers such that we are able to ensure that we don't overload the network, and in a nutshell, keep the lights on for the future.
Yeah, very well spoken. So
I think that was a lot of waffle.
No, it wasn't. So I wanted to play that clip because I think it shows the complexity here and the work that needs to happen, even down to, as Peter's doing, specific street level. I think Adriana summed it up best when she said, you need national policies and the COPs to happen, but you also need local action and local commitment to make it work. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. It's really appreciated. As I mentioned on the end of the previous episode, this is still very much a new thing for us. We're still working out the best length, the best style, the types of content that people might be interested in. So any feedback or thoughts on the episode would be hugely, hugely appreciated. Thanks so much.